Okay, so welcome here. Thank you for being here at this second edition of the ECO-SOS Doctorials. As you know, this is an activity which has been designed for the PhD students, in order to provide PhD students of the ECO-SOS some kind of training about with presentation skills. As you know, we have one edition in December and another edition in June. And our expectations are to maintain this schedule for the upcoming years. Okay, so in December, because it's something like a preparation for our big workshop that we pay in February, and in June, because typically we start now the season of conferences and workshops. So today we have 7+1 presentations. I say 7+1 because we have 4 presentations in a short format. So these 4 presentations are, the aim of them is to provide a very short interview, a very short insight about own research. So we have been thinking about them in something like a presentation of some ideas of the thesis, of some ideas for the next chapter of the thesis, or some research questions that you may have in mind in a very short format. So we have allocated 10 minutes, taking into account all the preparation time. So it's about 6-7 real time in order to provide these very short insights. And then we have let's say standard presentations in a 20-minute format. Presentations, the idea is just to reproduce a normal presentation in a conference or in a workshop. So 20 minutes, some time for questions, some comments, as you are going to encounter in any conference where you are going to present. And finally, at the end, we have always a presentation which is different. In this case, because it is made by a senior researcher. So let us, Chechu and me, thank Ricardo for accepting to be here. And the idea about this presentation is obviously to present his or her research. In this case, there are different options. So we expect senior researchers to present a paper, on a standard paper, or we expect them to present something like a summary of the research interest, something like a collection of the state of art of any topic in which he or she is interested. So today Ricardo is going to talk about congestion in roads and airports, diagnosis and policy. So without any additional comment, let's go to the first presentation. The first presentation is by Harris Papadakis, is financial integration in Europe during the 19-20 centuries. Harry, yeah. You have 6-7 minutes more.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you listen to me? Yeah. Okay, good morning. My name is Harris Papadakis, and the title of my research project is Financial Integration in Europe during the 19th and 20th centuries, under the supervision of Professor Nektarios Aslanidis and Professor Julia Lovtsev. My research project is focused on studying the financial integration in 19th-20th centuries, and is called upon to answer 2 main questions, research questions: when and how European financial linkage in strength, and how significant was the impact of European financial co-movements and spillover effects in a global perspective. Okay, let's not change. I have a problem. No. Okay. And international macroeconomics has a focus on macroeconomic aggregates and short-run dynamics and a close connection to international finance. Main topics are the characteristics of open economy business cycles, determination of current account dynamics and exchange rates, the role of monetary policy in open economies and the emergence of balance of payment problems and debt crisis. Also, there is a large academic literature on the 19th-20th century commodity market integrations, as well as a good knowledge of real macroeconomic interrelations, especially for Europe and North America. However, little is known about the financial market linkages and how they are developed during the two previous centuries. The aim of the current project is to measure financial co-movements and spillover effects among the European markets and those between the European and world markets. To that end, we plan to provide a systematic and finally detailed quantitative assessment of the evolution of these financial links over a long time span, covering almost 2 centuries of data. In this session, an interesting hypothesis to test is how strong were the links in the local European markets during the long 19th century and how they affected their integration in the 20th century. The final aim of the project is to analyze European financial come-overs and spillovers in a global perspective and in relation to North America, Asia. Okay, sorry.
It's not possible.
It's not
I'm
possible.
sorry, but we have tried to change that because it's the way this room is designed. So it's really a pity. But if we are sending that with Teams, we cannot use full screen here. We have been trying to solve that previously, but we didn't manage. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Again, the final aim of the project is to analyze European are the NBR macroeconomic history database, the macro history database, the AHNet database, and the database of Professor David Jacks. Also, there is a large number of economic indicators in many countries at monthly, quarterly, and annual frequencies from 1850 to 2000. These indicators include a wide range of economic and financial data, such as prices and quantities, both in aggregate and industry level, volumes and values of aggregate and disaggregated international trade, prices and quantities in financial markets, and measures of labor market conditions. Okay. Then to carry out our research, we will use advanced econometric techniques, and our method will be built on the machinery of multivariate structural time series models, which move movements in observed data as driven by a limited number of latent factors. The conceptual reduction allows us to analyze our large and complex. Sorry, what happened? Did something?
Okay. So you have better skills than us. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for being in time. Comments, questions? I have because it's a very interesting topic, but well, it's a very long period. You're talking about a couple of centuries. How to deal with all this huge heterogeneity about institutions, about currencies, about wars, about trade integration, even about national borders that are changing, have changed a lot during this 200-year period. So how to manage that?
Yes, we plan to use detailed financial data and indices, prices, and others. And we want to build a multivariate model in order to combine this data and find the relationships and how influence one time of period, for example, Great Depression, other significant periods all over the world. I hope that the models and we will be built will be very helpful and efficiently for our plan. Details for the future.
I'm not expecting details right now, just to have a general view, because, well, it seems a very long period and a very changing period.
Yes, this is a difficult, but it's a challenging to improve and to find good results about it.
Okay, there is another question by Asier there. You may use the microphone, yes. Yeah.
You have to switch on.
Now it's on.
Is it on? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I was just wondering about the type of data you're going to use. I mean, you say prices and quantities, and you talk about financial linkages, but that's very general. It could mean anything, really. And you also say there's little knowledge about financial. I mean, your motivation slide said something like, little is known about financial linkages or something like that. I mean, I think the international macro literature is huge, and there's like a lot. I mean, I don't know exactly what you have in mind. So, I mean, these are
yes.
Three different things, I suppose. But
yes, in my research, there is no only financial data, but economic and macroeconomic data.
Fine, but what type of financial data you're going to use?
I don't know exactly for at the moment, because now I'm building the model.
Okay.
But there is a lot of data, both financial and macroeconomics, in these databases. So I don't know exactly what I will use. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have time for only one very short question.
Thank you.
No? Okay, thank you very much. Let's, Harris. Ignacio Sanchez, creating a sense of sharing in co-working spaces, the role of space in shaping community narratives. Which one is?
Vale, he enviat un PDF.
És PDF.
Pot ser... No, aquí no.
No, si és PDF l'hem de compartir. Un segon.
Bueno, també està l'altra versió.
Està també en
només he enviat una sola.
Vale, doncs espera, llavors l'hem de...
Però a l'USB tinc la...
Espera.
Tinc l'orient.
Espera. Quan era en PDF, com s'havia de fer?
Compartir pantalla.
Perdona. Pues que no puc sortir d'aquí. És això. Ja no, és que és el PDF ja. Què és aquest d'aquí? No. I tens aquí del Carlos...
Aquesta que diu versió curta.
Aquesta d'aquí. 7, ¿no? Sí. Perfecto. Sí, espera.
Ah, ¿honest?
Ah, bueno, este.
Vale, ok. Gracias. Vale. Listo, ¿no? Hello, good morning. I'm presenting one of my chapters of my thesis. It's titled "Creating a Sense of Sharing in Co-working Spaces: The Role of a Space in Shaping Community Narratives." My doctoral thesis is titled "Urban Practices and Social Narratives in the Sharing City: The Construction of the Imaginaries from the New Communities of Sharing." And this is an empirical study on how do spaces promote sharing practices. My research questions are how the physical space in co-working offices shapes sharing practices between users, and how do community coordinators manage the dynamics of sharing in a co-working space. Basically, a co-working space is an open plan office environment based on the idea and the value of community. The cohesion of the co-working its space and community. And it's an habitus where members symbolically construct a collective sense of belonging. Another key term in this research is a place atmosphere. Is the effort to design buying environments to produce and create certain emotional effects. It's a relevant marketing and management tool. Influence behaviors. It's related to the quality of feeling and design different feelings, create feelings, and it has a persuasive character. The methodology that we use is a grounded theory. It's a qualitative research approach guided by the interpretatism paradigm, and theory emerged of the field during the process of exploration. Our research techniques are semi-structured interviews with co-working spaces managers and consultants, non-participant observation in 17 co-working spaces, and field notes. And the time of the fieldwork was from December of 2018 to March 2021. In Barcelona and Berlin, two important business cities and the cities that lead the co-working activity in Europe. With respect to the findings, co-working space take advantage of the values of sharing, such as participation, sustainability, community, although its primary goal is not social. Sharing is part of the storytelling and corporate discourse of co-working spaces. It's used in the corporate image. Events are an opportunity for the community to become visible, recognized, and publicized. And managing uncertainty and design safe atmospheres are key points for the future. This is especially after COVID. For example, we have common areas in a co-working office in Berlin. These areas, social areas, are designed to foster sharing and encounters. Flex spaces materialize and casual feel, a shell-out feel that foster encounters and contacts between the members. The co-working infrastructure is created to evoke home feeling. It's like create a home, a comfortable space, and community and space promotes relations. An important space in co-workings are community kitchens, or the space of the kitchen, are nuclei for sharing and socializing. In this case, not just a space is shared, is the responsibility of take care of that space, it's also shared. And the different agreements and norms are shared. The corporate discourse through the business storytelling, it's perceived in all the spaces, communicating the different values that has the narratives of sharing. Another point is organization of events. It's a public relations strategy that it's mostly used to make these spaces more dynamic and connect coworkers as members of the same community. Could be planned or informal events. Finally, in the discussion and conclusion of this chapter, after lockdown, place atmosphere is more important than even before. It's not just to implement biosecurity measures, it's important to communicate them. Through the different media channels, the space, the announcements. It's important to offer to the coworker a sense of security. And finally, physical space is a differential element of coworking, but it's not defining to foster sharing. It's important, but it's not the only one. The role of management team is crucial to energize the space and its place atmosphere in order to communicate business values and organizational identity. Sense of sharing is created through place atmospheres and the mutual collaboration between members. And community narratives are shaped by social realities and projected corporate identities in co-working spaces. So spaces, futures are part of these identities. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Comments, questions? Carlos?
No, in this case, we only work in private because in my thesis, I'm studying the government actor and the private actor in the private company. So in the case of the private companies and the shared spaces, I'm studying this one. It's like the way that the private actor and the private companies see and construct the sharing entity. And in this case, this this study is just in Barcelona and Berlin. But it's important to compare with another cases because the dynamics are totally different between the big cities and the small cities.
You have said something at the end of your presentation, but what about the effects of COVID-19 and all the social distance measures and all this lack of social interaction at the end? Because co-working areas are for social interaction. So how to deal with that and how to help them to be successful again according to current circumstances?
See, the biggest challenge in this moment for co-working's management teams is to come back to the different activities in the group. So regarding to the space, they are reducing the affordment in the spaces, implement different measures. They cancel all the events activity, and this is a complex part of this study because in the idea of community, you can activate the community sharing. And if you don't have events, that is the main activity to share in an office, you can share. So they are doing digital events. They are starting again to the events agenda in this moment, most 1 year after, more than a year, and it's not complete. So, for example, they are not doing Christmas parties or after works parties, etc. The social activities.
In any case, to take advantage of the fact time period covers pre-COVID and post-COVID. So as you have data from before that and after that,
yes,
this is a great advantage because then you may compare both situations.
Yes, both situations are different, but in this case, the perspective is from the space, and the changes in the space is basically the number of coworkers that are working, and the distance to maintain the distance and something like that. But in the activity of public events or share with another people, they change a lot. And in the case for me, I started this field work in Berlin, and it was I felt free doing. But in the case of Barcelona, I had a lot of restrictions because it was after COVID, and the ways of manage the coworkings in both cities are completely different.
Okay, thank you very much. Last very short question, please.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for the presentation. My question is,
Hello? See?
what is the trend in Europe, except Spain? In Europe, which countries the co-working is growing more than other countries? And the second question is, what is about price of, for example, if I want to lend one space in co-working per hour, or it's per day, the lending the place? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bueno, first, your last questions. It depends of the space, no? The difference between the difference between the plan that you contract. So if you have, for example, you have plans per day, per week, or per month, and even you have plans for 1 year, for example. It depends, and it depends if you are just a freelance, or you have a company, or you are a group. Okay. Yes, for freelance, it could be around between 200 and 300 euros per month in average. But you can, for example, in our sample, we have one social, a co-working with social impact that it's oriented to social entrepreneurs, and you can find for a freelance for 150 euros around. It depends of your project, because in some cases the office is interested in your project, and you can do strategic relations and networking, and it could be great. It depends. The profile of the coworker, it's linked to the profile of the office.
I should tell them what I'm doing.
What? Hmm?
Tell them my job. I can't do apparently.
It depends. It depends. It's very strategically, because these are difference between the situation pre-COVID and post-COVID, because post-COVID they are amplifying the criteria to the new coworkers. And the countries, for example, Italy is growing a lot in the theme of co-working space. Italy, Portugal, in co-working spaces, but Barcelona, but Spain and Germany are leading this activity.
Okay, thank you very much for your nice presentation and questions. José Ignacio. So, ecological footprint, international analysis, and drivers.
Para cambiarlo con los flechitos. Hello everyone, good morning. Well, my name is Nami Ramirez, and I'm gonna give you a quick overview about my thesis and the orientative structure, and also I'm gonna talk a little bit about the paper that I'm working on. And while I'm working along with my supervisors, Juan Antonio Duro and Yulivia Lopcha. Okay, so just quick image, so you know a little bit of what I want to talk about. Well, my motivation, it's to address international quantitative analysis of interest in order to derive guidance on strategies of policy to some of the problems below that I found in the literature, which is anthropogenic pressures on the Earth system. Human activities increasingly influence the Earth's climate and ecosystems. And the current rates of resources harvesting and waste generations deplete nature faster than it generates. So this is the thesis orientative structure. The first one, which is the ecological footprint balance and the international analysis and drivers, is a paper that I'm going to talk about or just give you a quick overview. And well, the main purpose of this paper is to analyze the balance of the demand, which is the ecological footprint, and the supply, which is the biocapacity of the world's natural resources. The second pillar, well, this thesis will have 4 pillars. As I mentioned, first is the ecological footprint. The second would be the material stocks, and well, this is motivated by the patterns and the dynamics of material stocks influence current and future resources use, and the global, the greenhouse gas emissions, well, through a variety of mechanisms. So the idea of here is, well, there will be data available in the summer of this year. And this data will be for 170 countries. Well, so we would like to use that data in order to create some innovative analysis. The third pillar is diet and the use of resources. So this is to face the challenge of meet nutritional demands while reducing the greenhouse house emissions. And well, it's concerning that the use of land for biomass productions, which it could be cropland, is among the most important pressures of biodiversity. And the last pillar, which is this SDG metrics, SDG metrics adapted to countries. It's because, well, achieving targets such as the SDG requires it, reducing emissions of greenhouse gases to 0 around 2050. So this is one of the main motivations. So let me talk a little bit about this first paper, which we call Ecological Footprint Balance, International Analysis and Drivers. And what the expected publication date is on December 2021, by the end of the year. And let me start with the concept. The ecological footprint concept. Well, as you can see in the image, the ecological footprint of consumption, which is the one that I'm going to use, indicates the consumption of biocapacity of a country's inhabitants. This is calculated with the ecological footprint of production, which is the consumption of biocapacity resulting from production's process within the countries, plus the imports minus the exports. And we call that the net ecological footprint of trade. Okay, so after that, well, well, I reviewed some of the literature available right now. I just placed 3 of the main papers that I noticed that it's similar to what we want to do. The main thing here is that, as you can see in the index for evaluating sustainability, the 3 papers that I found, they use the ecological footprint per capita, which is, and well, it's interesting, but in my case, I want to focus in the balance, which I'll explain in the second slide. So, as I mentioned, the ecological footprint is widely used. However, given the climate change and resource constraints, biocapacity, or rather how we manage it, which is the supply of resources, is increasingly determining humanity's future. So because of that, the metric that I'm going to use is the ecological footprint divided by the biocapacity, which is the ecological footprint balance. The data, it's obtained from the national footprint and biocapacity accounts. It's available online, and it's for about 200 countries. And in this paper, I'm going to do it for 154 countries from 1995 to 2016. And just a quick overview about the balance: 1995, 2005, 2016, and this is just an overview of the balance of each region according to the World Bank region. As you can see, we are in red, except for Latin America, Caribbean, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And Latin America and the Caribbean is mainly because of Brazil, which has a large amount of biocapacity. To do the analysis, we're going to use the fail index and the STIRPAD model. So in that way, we can see with the inequality in the world, and the STIRPAD, we want to analyze the drivers. This is just the formula for the fail index, which is going to help us analyze the inequality. I'm not going to go deep here, so just you have an overview there. This is a global inequality, which is mainly homogeneous, except for 2006, which has a peak right there. And one of the properties of fail index is that we can decompose it, which means that we can analyze the inequality between the groups and within the groups. To give you a better idea, let me show you this next slide, where, as I mentioned, I use the World Bank subgroups that I mentioned in the previous slides. And here you can see that half of the inequality is explained by the inequality between the groups, which is about 50%. And the difference within the groups, it's lower in 2016 compared to 1995, which is the beginning of the chart. If you see, you can see it's going down. It's another method to do this. To do the analysis is to do a multiplicative decomposition, which the factor is ecological footprint divided by the GDP per capita, and population divided by the biocapacity. This method will allow us to analyze that part of the balance, what part of the balance is due to the endowment and what part is due to the resource usage. And that's what we want to analyze. We'll see what we get. Just quick correlations. I think it's maybe time, but so this is just to see the correlations between the GDP per capita and the balance, which is, as I mentioned, ecological footprint divided by the biocapacity. And well, it has a positive correlations. A positive correlation, and as you can see in 2016, it's a little bit higher than 2005, but it's still lower than 1995, which is, we presume that it might be decomposing this situation. And I think I'm gonna skip the next one, so I'm on time, and just quick overview about the STIRPAD model. We want to see or analyze the drivers, which is the affluence, urbanization, and endowment. And finally, we plan to use the estimating dynamic panel data models, which is going to help us complete this analysis. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Noemi. Comments, questions from the audience?
So I was thinking you were going to say something about what's driving this ratio that you're doing of bio?
The drivers?
Yeah, no, wait, don't move. So you have a ratio of, I suppose it's consumption of materials.
Yeah, it's
to,
ecological footprint divided by the biocapacity.
yeah, divided by the supply. And
Yes.
then I thought you said you were gonna decompose in the two parts.
Yes.
Inequality in those
in
two
the
parts.
drivers.
Is that the idea?
That's the idea. It's
Okay.
to.
And what do you get?
What right now we'll see like here, for example, it's the inequality, which is it's a what do you mean?
No, what I'm asking is you have that ratio EF to bio, and bio is the supply. And I thought what you were going to do is decompose that ratio into its determinants. What? And I thought you were going to say now 40% of inequality is due to inequality in biocapacity and 60% is due to EF inequality or something like that.
No, it's more about the balance. It's not that we're gonna study ecological footprint and biocapacity. It's just that the balance, it means that some has deficit and some of them they have like more resources, or it could be either because they have higher resources or because the ecological footprint is lower. So what we want to see is in those regions, which ones are using more resources or which one are using less resources that they have higher or lower balance. Does it make sense?
Okay, let's talk later.
Okay. Okay, good. I can take it offline.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? A huge company with very small ones. So, because at the end you are taking all of them as the same units.
No, they're weighted by their biocapacity.
Okay.
They're weighted.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Let's move to the next. Determinants and impacts of learning in the context of the workplace.
Okay, good morning to everyone. I'm Carlos, and I will share some insights of the second article of my thesis, together with my supervisor, Ferran Mañé. The title is provisional, but for sure it has to do with learning in the workplace. This is a brief outline of today's presentation. The motivation for this second article stems from the results of the previous one. We found that the labor market rewards to a greater extent those skills developed after graduation, after university graduation, rather than those developed during the studies, which is a signal that of the importance of workplace learning. The intuition behind this is that what you learn in the workplace context is strongly related what you perform during your job, rather than that those skills will develop during the studies. In this line, there is increasing recent evidence pointing to the importance of informal learning, of what you do just in the workplace context, rather than training or other more formal mechanisms of learning. Despite the relevance of workplace learning, while some firms for sure engage in skill development in their organizations, others don't. And you can check for this in the recent European Company Survey report by Huten and Russo, which is a really big size study. A potential explanation for this is that maybe some firms, maybe there is a trade-off between learning and production at some point, and some firms are not willing to assume this trade-off. Then for this article, the research interest and the contribution is trying to understand on-the-job learning from a job and workplace design perspective. It means from the side of the employer, just the firm thinking whether or not to trying to improve or not learning in their organizations. And this might imply from job design, training policies, recruitment policies, etc. Then for this article, the research strategy is twofold with an empirical analysis. And today's presentation, I will focus on the theoretical analytical framework, which is a multitask principal agent model. Why this model? Because it is an stylized depiction of the worker-employer relationship. Okay. Then we depart from a benchmark model that is a multitask principal agent model with the usual moral hazard problem with unobservable effort, the risk incentive trade-off, and also, since it's a multitask model, the multitask incentive problem. Then the functions are pretty standard, a negative exponential utility function that depends for the agent on wage and the disutility caused by effort, that is this CE. And also the parameter R is the measure of risk aversion of the agent. The principal's payoff is simply the profits minus the wages it is paid to the agent. A linear output production function, we just add this theta parameter that, since it's a multitask model, that there are two tasks, we account that the second task might be less productive, has a lesser contribution to output than the first one, okay? Then there is a linear compensation scheme that depends on a fixed part and a variable part depending on output or on an imperfect measure of output. That's why the asterisk. And then a quadratic cost function that is adapted from one of the first papers in this strand of models, with the only contribution that the cost parameter that affects the effort exerted in different tasks is different from task to task. And this is one of the main ideas why we are using this environment. From this article by Thiel in 2010, there is a very interesting interpretation that the cost parameter is like an inverse measure of skill. This means that the more skilled a person is in a task, for a task-specific skill, exerting effort in that task drives less disutility. You are more skilled, then less disutility for you to exert effort in this task. From this perspective, learning, which is developing skills, and in the terms of the model is decreasing these cost parameters, is beneficial for both parties, both the agent and the principal. For the agent, it implies reduced disutility of exerting effort. For the principal, it will drive higher profits due to the higher exerted effort of the agent because of this reduced disutility. Another main idea behind why we are using this environment is this idea at the end of Ito's article that the principal could invest in work conditions, very general, no, to reduce the marginal cost of effort. From our perspective, the principal could invest in increasing learning opportunities in the organization, since this will imply this reduction of disutility of exerting effort. When it comes to workplace learning, in the literature, there always have been like two different conceptions. One is that you learn while you produce, while you exert effort in the productive task, in the productive process. This is learning by doing from Arrow. It's very, very famous. And the other one is learning or producing. That learning implies a trade-off and takes away some effort from the productive process, no? Like maybe going to a training course would be a really direct example, no? And then all these ideas we are trying to include in this multitask principal agent framework, okay? Then just for illustrative purposes, we depart from the particular case where theta is 0, just to make that the second task is fully unproductive, no contribution to output, okay? This is because if we depart from here, then the trade-off is really clear. This is the variation of the cost parameter is the learning function because it means the increase of skills if cost is reduced. Then the phi parameter is the weight that the other task has on learning for the productive task, since we have defined that the second task is unproductive. The first task is the one that contributes to production. Then the higher is phi, the higher the trade-off between producing or learning. If phi is lower and it's closer to 0, then it's like a learning by doing model, because you learn the first task specific ability just by exerting effort on this first task. Okay? Then this phi parameter accounts for this trade-off, for which of the two mechanisms is stronger in place. Okay? Then the delta parameter accounts for depreciation, since if not relevant learning effort is exerted, the cost is assumed to rise over time due to a skill obsolescence. If you don't increase your skills, they are assumed to decline over time because the reality in the workplace context is changing and all that stuff. And this function over here that I won't go into detail, but this E of C1 is just a function that accounts for some non-linearities. What do I mean with this? The learning process is not linear. Exerting some learning effort is not the same if you are just beginning to develop a skill that if you are kind of in the middle, or that if you already have a high level of that skill. It implies a higher learning cost or learning effort to build the foundations of a skill, and also to achieve the higher levels, kind of a proficiency. And this only accounts for non-linearities. If you are interested, I can show it later, but I want to stick to the time. Okay, and this modulates the learning effect of effort. And then just the last idea is that in addition to this learning trade-off from the perspective of the agent, here we are trying to incorporate this idea that the principal might make some kind of investment in order to improve the learning process. Yeah, and then the idea would be just the principal giving away some profits in the first period, with expecting to receive higher profits on the second period. And somehow, and we are just developing it right now, this is work in progress, a function of the principal investment will enter into the learning function, just increasing or affecting how the effort of the agent affects this cost variation. And this is at the point that we are right now with this, trying to convert ideas into formulations and specifications. And well, thanks for your attention. And if you have comments, suggestions, or whatever, and these are the references that I have put along my presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? There is one from there, please.
My question is, thank you for presentation. Did you consider the age of the staff from the company, like, if I understand?
Well, since this is like the theoretical framework, this is really abstract, really stylized. This kind of information is not considered. Afterwards, in the empirical application, that we have richer data from workers, I mean, different, really richer data, maybe we take it into account. But in this analytical environment, everything has to be kept the most simple possible, because if complexity grows really fast if you include additional variables.
Okay, but in the literature, they consider the different ages for example, the people from university between 30 and people until 40, 50, yes?
Yeah, for sure, the learning ability depends on the stage of the life cycle, and also depends on your previous education. There are complementarities on learning for sure. All these ideas are clear in the literature, and we will try to manage it properly in the empirical application.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very nice. So I wanted to ask you about your empirical model also. If you think that the learning process depends on the gender, and also if it's a high skill job or a low skill job. Do you think that this, or I don't know if you would like to consider it in your empirical?
Yeah, being not so specific, but kind of more general, for sure, learning has to do with demographics. I'm not sure to say just ex ante, but it might. And for sure, organizational characteristics and job characteristics, whether the composition of tasks of the job or of your complexity have been found to impact the learning process in the workplace, then for sure they might have an impact. The question is how, which magnitude and all these things. But yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And a very, in fact, so this using or learning or producing, whether this is influenced by industry or by the type of workplace.
Yeah, I forgot to share this really important idea, and Ferran will be upset with me because of that, because in fact this is our intuition and this is our hypothesis, and at the end, linking the theoretical framework with the empirical part, what we would expect to find is that it's the production process, the industry or the firm reality or the market reality, whether if it's more competitive or less competitive, which determines if this trade-off is stronger or not, or if the learning by doing mechanism is stronger or not. Therefore, we expect and we think that for sure which mechanism is in place depends on the productive reality and on the environment of the firm. Yep. I forgot to say that, but that is the idea behind all of this.
Okay, thank you very much, Carlos. To the three of them, financial performance, environmental, social, and governance, evidence from our industry.
Okay. Which is this one is no, this one, the third one. Yes.
The third one. Okay.
Okay. 20 minutes. All right, so it's a bit longer. All right, so good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I see new faces here. For those who don't know me, my name is Jakub Abdi. I work in a business management department with Xiaoni and Javi. For today, I will be talking about, I'm going to talk about how firms' conditions of financial performance, ownership structure, and some characteristics of size and age are going to impact its participation in ESG activities. So first, I will be outlining the importance of the topic. Then I will continue by highlighting two research streams that which related to the firm, and then I will be talking specifically about my research methodology, data and design, and empirical results. And to finish, I will very briefly discuss why we feel and we think this study is important from a theoretical perspective and for managerial perspective. All right, so move on. Yes. We know that the sustainability concept as we know it today back to 30 years ago when for the first time it appears on the so-called Bertland report, which also called Our Common Future, back in 1978, produced by several countries for the United Nations. And the core idea was if we is to meeting the needs, all the needs of the current generation, without compromising the needs of the future generation. We have to somehow think, because if we continue to use the resources on the planet, so just they're going to run out, and then for the next generation there would be nothing. So just an example for you, for example, I saw somewhere that if we go on continue using the crude oil, for example, in 50 years, so it's going to be all over. So we should do something. And also the core idea, that was the framework designed for the firms. Its translation actually to the firm is to somehow stop their destructive impact on the environment, because of some very well-known problems like pollution, like what we have somehow global climate change, and also for their social image, which is we have a lot of problem with like a child labor, like somehow sweet shops. This is a common problem also. And in the management level, like for example, we have like a lot of problem of bribes and corruption in the management level. So the ESG, let's move on. Okay, so the ESG framework is designed to address actually these issues for the firms. For the airline industry, which is the industry my study is focused on, actually my thesis as well. So it's very important. It's very, very important, like industry around the world. Just consider that before coronavirus, just back in 2019, more than 4.5 billion passengers were used and carried out by the industry. And if it was the country, it was the 20th biggest economy in the world, just as same as Switzerland. So this is a very important, like one of the biggest industries actually. And as you can see, having the activities in that scale, which was very, the worldwide operation. Of course, it does have some implication for the environment. Just to tell you that 2% of the all human included carbon dioxide were produced by the airline industry in 2019, just before coronavirus, because we know that all the flights stop and due to the safety measure or this kind of the health reasons. And in all transport industries, it was like a 12%. So this, and actually just think of, because it's actually related to some face-to-face activities, and the services for the airline industry are quite direct. So because if you want to use airlines, you have to go to the airplane. But if you want to use, for example, this mouse, you may never meet the company where it's produced. So having this, the importance for the airline, and some ecological and environmental footprint that they have. So they, along with other firms, they started to adopting these ESG activities. And that just to with the most update statistics that we have in 2018, 38% of the 100 more major airlines were adopted these ESGs. Where so far it has nothing with me and my thesis, because I'm from finance. So adopting, but here is the point, adopting these ESG measures have some financial implications for the firm. That buying new eco-friendly equipment, adopting more improved safety measures, and producing high quality products is not for free. And these firms have to invest money in. So there is a lot of research. The issue has been studied across industries around the world back in last several decades. And the major stream of the research is focusing actually on if firm adopt its activities, how it impacts in financial performance and its value. Okay, but of the most relevant of my study, which is somehow called like swimming against the tide, I investigated, so in which conditions firms will, we have some internal factors for the firm. And based on this factor, the management is going to decide whether or not to participate in ESG activities. Okay, so we, among the suggested variables in the literature, we investigate the financial performance and size and age. We also investigate, the moderation rule of the ownership structure, because ownership is an important factor for the firm, and it depends on who owns the firm and who runs the firm. So some strategies and decisions would be different in different firms. So this is sustainability in industry. So the methodology I use is from economic perspective. It's panel data econometrics. I use the data for the sample of the 36 major airlines and these data are retrieved from the Thomson Reuters Econ database for the period of 2008 to 2019. And it also includes the data related to ESG scores. So it's one of the four databases providing that ESG. We also retrieved there. Here's our hypothesis based on the literature. We expect the positive influence of financial performance, state ownership, actually, and size and age for the on ESG activities. Here, like some study variables and models, which I'm going to skip to the, I know probably some of you find the presentation boring. So the empirical finding is we found a significant evidence between financial performance and ESG activities. It means that when airlines are economically are in a good condition, they probably skip participating in ESG activities because they feel that if they have like a good financial return and they pay out, their stakeholders very well, so they don't need, these costly like measures like ESG. And also we find the state ownership actually moderate the relationship between financial performance. As it depicted here, you can see that we have two lines. The negative slope, it means that, it showed that the negative relationship actually between financial performance and ESG. But you see that we have two lines, the red and the blue line. The red line is for the state-owned airlines, and actually the blue one is for the non-state-owned airlines. You see that the two lines are not paralleled, they are not equal. So it means that, it's for the red one, it's somehow steepest, and so it means that the relationship actually between financial performance and ESG activities is somehow moderated by state ownership. For the size related to the size and age, we found that actually size and both of them significantly influence the ESG activities. It means that the bigger actually and the older firms are, considering to participate more in these ESG activities. And the rationale is that when the firm is bigger and is older, so it's well known in the society, and also when it's bigger, you see that has the more available resources to allocate something to the ESG activities. And this is positive relationship. We expect some implication because this is a first study specifically for the airline industry. Study in this research stream are limited in general, but this is a first study specifically for the airline. So we add we offer some evidence, empirical evidence to the current body of the literature. And also probably our finding could be considered by the airline practitioner because, and to help them somehow to manage their social decision process. Well, we have some limitations because we didn't found like too much airlines. This is just for 36 airlines, so the results are just applied for these airlines. And thank you very much, everybody, for listening me. If you have any question or something, so.
Okay, thank you very much, Yahoo, for your nice presentation. Comments, questions at the end.
What you have inside these practices, this I don't know the ESG practices. What do you have inside there?
Well, ESG is referring to the environmental. Look at some issues, some pollution, some their impact. Actually, the firm has some impact because they have the air, which is for the airlines. They produce the carbon dioxide. Which is not good. For the planet, and it led to the issue some climate change. For the social, I highlighted some problems. With the social side, that child labor, for example. This is and problem related to the relationship with stakeholder and with consumers actually for the firm. And for the managerial level, we always have a problem with bribes, with corruption in management and the board level. And the ESG is referring, I don't know if I got your question correctly, but this is the main idea for the ESG standards actually. And
in a consistent way, I mean, among different airlines, this indicator, this ESG?
Actually, the idea is too broad and in general, as in not, and this is how it works. The firms are reporting their activities related with this issue. There are some sub-factors for each of these dimensions, and the firms are, for example, reporting that. So we have like a tree, for example, educating for our employees. We have reduced, for example, we have applied the new standards, and we use new jet fuel to reduce the impact for the planet. And they report. And there are some organizations, some databases, about them with using different formula to measure, and to somehow weighting these activities. And then they report the scores 0 to 100 to each of these, for each of these ESG dimensions for each airlines. So, for example, like Thomson Reuters database, like Bloomberg, like KLD. And there is another database that I haven't it in mind, but later, if you want, I can. But
probably the most important factor is the age of the fleet, right? Because the new aircraft are much less pollutant than the other ones.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. So at the end, well, it depends basically on how you renew your fleet
actually, we didn't deep dive, actually.
We're using leasing contracts or something like that to have like newer aircraft.
Of course, it could be like an influential factor, but we didn't deep dive to technically to. So, for example, which task specifically is done by each airline to address these issues. Our job as a financial, as a analyst, we just use the data from and then we apply some measures to to see how is financial performance and state of the profitability and the other characteristics is going to help the firm with it. These characteristics are let the firm to participate or not, and how they impact, what is the. But technically, yes, that could be some,
Another thing, and that's my last point, is that your financial situation can affect in terms of investments that you are going to realize some periods later, right? So if you are financially strong and you can make some investments to carry out these kind of policies, like for instance renewing the aircraft fleet, you're going to see the effect of these investments later, like some years later, right?
Yeah, exactly. We got the data from 2008 to 2019, and we just analyzed this impact, but we didn't but that's true that we see it later. Could be some lags, could be good for the model, but we didn't investigate it probably for.
Of public ownership, you have carriers that have some public participation, so it's not 0-1, right? You have private companies, but you also have partially.
Exactly. 17 major airlines still are state-owned by, yes, because this is some kind of.
I mean, it's not either public or private. It's that there's some public participation.
Exactly.
Especially right now after
the
coronavirus outbreak.
Exactly, that's true. That's definitely true. Thank you for that.
Okay, question back for Antonio and then Carlos.
Okay, so thank you very much for the presentation. Okay,
You're welcome.
I think that the topic is very interesting, and maybe I have lost some information because you have the time, you have a limited time. Only a very technical brief question. What has been basically the panel data strategy that you have followed? Because I didn't hear anything about that. Maybe you have explained it already, but you have a sample which you have, I think, 36 firms and 11 years. So this is a sample which is a very special sample with very few cross-sectional units and, you know, a lot of years. So,
yeah.
So I don't know, maybe it's difficult to apply a simple fixed effect strategy. And here, maybe there are important, you know, time series effects and some inertia, I don't know. But basically, this is the point. I would like to know what has been your main strategy in terms of the panel data estimates.
Thank you so much for the question. Actually, you know, the technique we're going to use is depends, you know, in economic perspective, depends on the data. Because we have the data, for example, if it's cross-section, we have time series and we have panel data. Our data is panel because it's for the several entities, and during the time it has the characteristics of both time series and actually the cross sections. So we use the panel data because of the data, you know, panel data analysis because of the design of the data, and actually when you use the panel data, so for example there are some diagnostic tests you have to test. So for example, at the beginning, you know, you have to test between the random effect and then with the other with pooling effect, and then fixed effect with pooling, and then compare, you know. There are some different tests like Hausmann test, like a Bruce-Pagan test, and I didn't deep dive, you know, technically to this because I found, you know, because we all are from economics and business, we have some, you know, we have some background on this. So just based on this diagnostic test, I found my I found my result. As you can see here, for the first one, based on the diagnostic test, it's a fixed effect test because of, you know, this is based on the result from the Hausmann test. But for the second one, this is it's a pooling model actually, and as well based on the diagnostic test that we usually have in panel data analysis.
Yeah, only I finished with this point, but this is an static estimation. So in this case, maybe it would be interesting, I don't know in this paper, but I don't know, maybe it would be interesting to test if here you can find dynamic effects. So in this case, you have to prove another strategies, dynamic panel data models. But yeah,
yeah,
this is a recommendation because in this case, if you can apply dynamic panel data models, you can separate short-term elasticities and long-term elasticities.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. I will consider your point.
Okay, and Carlos, please.
My question has to do with the implication slide.
Okay.
When you talk about the implications, the last one,
yeah,
it was kind of, no, yeah, here. That's the last one for me. It's kind of against your reported results because you said there is this trade-off between sustainability, performance, and financial performance somehow, and then the implication for me is kind of, I don't get it because you say that sustainability is important in influencing shareholder wealth maximization.
Yeah.
While your results just showed the opposite, because the higher the sustainability level of these ESG policies, the lower the financial performance. Therefore, I'm not sure if the implication is this way around, or in fact, you have really found evidence for a trade-off between financial performance and sustainability. I mean, just saying, if you want to care to sustainability, you need to accept that your financial performance will be reduced or whatever. I don't know if it's only me, but I think the implication is is in odds with your results. I don't know if you agree with this or not.
Actually, the ESG, the idea is quite new, you know, and by analyzing this, you know, there is relationship with financial performance for just a specific industry, it has nothing with, you know, the outcome of, if you know, because there is a long debate on that, and the results are very, very inconclusive. For some of the, you know, some resulted in a positive relationship, some produce a negative, and some significant neutral. You know, depend on the industry and, you know, the characteristics, because they're gonna affect, you know, the outcome of the study. And, you know, just to provide that if it's negative or if it's, you know, positive, the implication could be, you know, also this is some insight for the airline manager. For example, if you are an Emirates, you know, Emirates manager, you haven't applied ESGs, but you say that you see the result of some studies, and you see that when you know, when you're gonna decide, so you see that for this industry, you're gonna look at the conducted papers and the result. So you see that, you know, it has the negative relationship. So you may postpone, you know, your decision. And in this aspect, this has implication. It doesn't mean that, you know, if we have the negative result, so it is not going to be applied for the industry. In this aspect, you know, it's giving them some insights and probably helping them in managerial social decisions, not specifically, you know, if it's whether if it's like a positive, negative, and neutral. I hope it's clear.
Okay, thank you presentation and for all your questions and comments. To next presenter, in contest to design emissions tax mechanisms.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mimi Zhang. Today, I would like to present a recent work using contest to design emission tax mechanism, joined with my supervisor, Antonio Osorio. And I will introduce this work from the following 6 sections. The first one is motivation, and then literature review, and then a theoretical framework of designing emission tax mechanism, and then the model, and then the result with discussion. The last one is conclusion. So what motivated us to do this paper? There are mainly 3 reasons. The first one, the importance of environmental issues. As we know, climate change has been regarded as one of the important challenges in the 21st century. So many countries have announced the date by which they want to be carbon neutral. Therefore, designing emission tax mechanism in a sustainable way is vital and challengeable. And based on some environmental-related literature, market-based instruments are the most efficient approach in emission reduction. Among them, environmental-related taxation is not only aimed at achieving emission reduction, but it can also incentivize market for green innovation and investment. And we are also motivated by green growth concept. So when we consider green growth, we have to think how to reduce pollution emission without affecting firms' production and economic growth. And then there is a lot of tons of literature about the environmental issues. And from the environmental policy perspective, that one important fact, even government have a range of the environmental policy tools to achieve their proposal. However, there are even no instrument considered to be optimal to address every environmental challenge. And some studies show the welfare gains from implementing an optimal carbon tax is at least 5 times higher than and optimal cap and trade policy. And from the methodology perspective, some papers in the industry organization literature discuss the different form of green R&D and environmental issues from different perspectives. And we are also inspired by McKinsey, who applied the permit allocation contest. It distributes permit to firms based on their rank relative to other firms, and it weakens the problems of unfairness. So based on this background, our intuition is once emission tax is introduced, firms either reduce their output or engaged in green R&D investment to reduce their emission tax burden. So based on this consideration, we're trying to design 3 different and new emission tax mechanisms. So we call the first one mechanism X. It is a taxation contest based on firms' output and relative to other firms, and it favors less firms' output. It means the higher production of firms produce, the more emission tax of firms need to pay. Yes, and the second one we called mechanism Z. It is a taxation contest based on firms' green R&D investment, and it favors higher firms' green R&D investment. It means higher green R&D investment of firms engaged in, the less emission tax a firm need to pay. And the third one we called mechanism M. It is taxation contest based on firms' net emissions. It means, and it favors less net emission. It means the higher the firm's net emission to produce, the more emission tax the firms need to pay. And the third one is a mixture of the previous 2. And then we compare these 3 mechanisms with a benchmark case. And we assume in the benchmark case, firms do not need to pay any emission tax. And our objective is to select the best emission tax mechanism among the 3 proposed mechanisms. And we also want to explore these 3 emission tax mechanism performs in terms of firms' green R&D investment, firms' output, and net emissions, consumer supplies, producer supplies, social welfare, and created value. So then let's have a look on our model. We consider a competitive market with 2 profit maximizing firms, 1 and 2, and they produce a homogeneous good and face a linear inverse demand function as shown in this slide. And we assume the production generates pollution, and the emission per output ratio is assumed to be equal to 1. And then firms can reduce their emission by undertaking green R&D investment. So we define firms' green R&D as firms' output minus firms' green R&D investment. And we allowed the firm's net emission to be negative. Given pollution, we define the total environmental damage as capital D, and capital E is the total firm's net emission, and we use small d capture the severity of the damage, and the value of the small d is between 0 to 1 to guarantee the positive output. And then we have the profit function as shown in this slide. And in this profit function, I want to emphasize, actually, each firms have to pay the tax over all firms' net emission. But remember, based on our emission tax mechanism, the tax rate is a proportion to that firm's green R&D investment, net emissions, and output. So, and then we use the consumer supplies to measure consumers obtain from consumption. Since the product have the negative externalities on consumers, so we use the environmental capital D to measure it. And we define the producer supplies as the total firm's profit, and we define the social welfare as consumer supplies plus producer supplies. And then we introduce created value, Y. And Y is the sum of product revenue and the total green firm's R&D. And the objective of Y is to proxy for country-specific variable like GDP and employment, etc. So then we examine a one-stage game in which firms simultaneously choose output and green R&D investment to maximize their profit. And we assume these two firms are symmetrical, and we obtain full set equilibriums. As I mentioned, our objective is to select the first best emission tax mechanism that can achieve carbon neutrality and economic growth by comparing the equilibriums of firms' production, net emissions, green R&D investment, producer supplies, consumer supplies, social welfare, and the created value. Then let's have a look at our result. So from proposition 1, we found when environmental damage are very low, that is D less than 1/4, there is none of the three mechanisms can achieve carbon neutrality because firms don't have a motivation to do the green R&D investment. Why? Because the cost of cleaning are very low, so there's no mechanism can achieve carbon neutrality. And when the environmental damage is in a relatively small region, that is 1/2 to 1, mechanism X and Z can achieve carbon neutrality. And however, when environmental damage in a relatively big region, that is 1/4 to 1, mechanism M can achieve carbon neutrality. To sum up, the lower the cutoff D, the better the mechanism. So mechanism M is the first best because it is the quickest mechanism to achieve carbon neutrality. From proposition 2, we found when environmental damage are low or in a small region, mechanism Z can provide the greatest incentives to firms' green R&D investment. And when environmental damage are high or in a wide region, mechanism M can provide the maximum incentives on firms' green R&D investment. From proposition 3, remember the logic of the mechanism Z, it is the higher the firm's green R&D investment, they can be allowed to produce more production. So when environmental damage are low, mechanism Z is the first best to achieve the maximum production. But when environmental damage become big, now the emission tax becomes a reward. Why? It's because now the firms cleaning are more than pollution. Therefore, in this case, and we also need to consider the logic of mechanism X. Remember, under mechanism X, the higher the production, the higher the reward a firm can obtain. Therefore, in this case, mechanism X can help firms obtain the maximum profit. Can help firms to obtain the maximized production. And then from proposition 4, we found when environmental damage are very low, mechanism is the first best to achieve minimum net emission to reduce environmental damage. And when environmental damage are high or in a wide region, the most efficient internalized mechanism is M. And because in the beginning, it can enable firms to reduce net emission, and then it provides a subsidy or reward to firms emission reduction. So it is the most efficient correcting environmental externality. From proposition 5, we found mechanism M is always the first best in any degree of environmental damage. Why? It's because, remember, when the damage are very low, under mechanism M, the output is the minimum, and the minimum output actually makes the less likely firms compete in product market, and then it results increase firms' profit. Therefore, mechanism M is the first best, and once D larger than 1/4, and firms can obtain subsidy under mechanism M. So in this case, mechanism M also the first best. And we also found compared with reducing output, actually the encouraging green R&D investment seems to be a more effective and cheaper way for firms to pay less emission tax. From proposition 6, according to the definition of our consumer supplies, there is a trade-off between the consumption benefit and the negative externality from the environment. And when D is small, when environmental damage is low, the utility from the intense production competition is more effective than the negative externality from environment. And in this case, mechanism Z is the first best to help consumers obtain the most net utility. And when environmental damage are high, and the environmental externalities is compensated, and consumers now can obtain the benefit from the abatement activities. So mechanism M can help consumers obtain the most benefit since it provides the highest environmental subsidy in this case. And in terms of social welfare, because the case A and B corresponding to a very small interval, so we mainly focus on case C and D. And we found mechanism M achieved a highest social welfare in a wide range of environmental damage. However, mechanism Z can also be a first best, but in a very small interval. And it's because in this interval, the consumer supplies is the dominant factor. The last proposition 8, we found that when environmental damage are very low or extremely high, mechanism Z can provide the greatest created value, since the greatest green R&D investment and output, because in our definition of the created value, it's only related to the green R&D investment and output. And in the extremely high case, it's because the positive impact of the production dominate. So mechanism Z become the first best. And when environmental damage is moderate or in a wide range, mechanism M achieve the greatest created value. It's because the green R&D investment impact it in a significant way than the revenue from consumption. And we also found an increase in the green investment is more effective to obtain the created value than an increase in production. So we use this table to summarize the proportion of the best emission tax mechanism in terms of different indicator. And we use the blue represent mechanism Z, and we use the red represent mechanism X, and green represent mechanism M. Yes. And we found when environmental damage are relatively small or in a small region, mechanism Z is the first best in terms of firms' production and green R&D investment, net emissions, consumer supplies, social welfare, and created value. However, mechanism M is the first in terms of producer supplies. And then when environmental damage are relatively high or in a big region, mechanism M is the first best in terms of green R&D investment, net emissions, producer supplies, consumer supplies, social welfare, and the created value. However, mechanism X is the first best only in terms of production. In this case, it means under high environmental damage. And therefore, we recommend mechanism M is always the first best mechanism for achieving carbon neutrality and maximum welfare. And besides, mechanism M and Z focus on the present and future decision, not to the past decision, and they are more like to be consensual and agreement by world power, like American, EU, and China. And the indigenization of tax mechanism embedded in a truly competitive context is fundamental, actually. And finally, the paper provides an efficient and intuitive solution to the problem of emission tax mechanism. And this mechanism incentivizes firms' green R&D investment, and that accelerate carbon neutrality, and that also minimize the impact of firms' production and economic growth. So thanks for your attention. Any question, comment, and suggest?
Okay, thank you. And so we have an exams period, so it's very difficult to manage that. The reason in the chat?
Yeah, Mimi, is a question from Carolina Manzano. And she says, Dear Mimi, maybe I'm wrong, but I think you have a strong assumption in relation to the cost of production, XI unit, not the cost related to emission. Is it zero? Why?
Okay, it's a good question, yes. Yes, we assume the cost of the production is zero. And we assume the emission per output is equal to 1. Actually, I need to think it more and then reply to Carolina.
Okay, you don't need to. You consider it for your paper, okay?
Okay, thank you.
So,
So in terms of modeling,
okay.
In your model, your firms choose simultaneously quantities and R&D, right?
Yeah.
Probably you should think about that because normally R&D is like a more strategic decision that has an influence on production or, pricing decisions. Decisions that are more like, less strategic, you know what I mean? So typically what to me would make more sense is to have a sequential choice in which you first choose R&D and then at a later stage you choose production. Okay, so you should eventually think about that because in the models that I've seen about R&D investments or advertising investments, you have like a first stage where you choose the more strategic variable that determines the less strategic variable that is chosen at a later stage. Okay, so eventually you could think about that.
Okay, thanks for your comment. Actually, we tried to use sequential step to obtain the equilibriums in the initially, but the problem is when we finished it, the result is not elegant. Can you understand? But yes, I should think it again. Thanks for your comment.
Okay, thank you. There is another question by Juan Antonio.
Okay, thank you for the presentation and this interesting paper, and also to your supervisors. Only one small point. In the model, you use this D parameter, which is the environmental damage, which can be different depending on the firm. Yeah, so you say that. Yeah, the point is that what happens in the model if you assume that this parameter is equal. Is equal. This parameter can be equal between firms. Imagine that you have two firms in a sector. Maybe here are assuming that you compare in sectors, but maybe you can compare in the same sector. What happens to the model if you introduce that this D is equal along all the firms? And I think that in this case the model will be simple. Yeah, maybe, but maybe it can be an interesting benchmark model. Yeah, because typically the emissions are the emissions, and the problems typically are global, related with CO2 emissions. So the problematics typically is global, not local. So the environmental damage can be, similar in a current way. Yeah, the environmental damage depends on the accumulative emissions. Yeah, so for the current emissions, maybe the environmental damage can be the same. I think that in this case, maybe the model can be simple, and maybe can be more simple to synthesize all the results that you have. You have many combinations of results depending on the parameters and depending on the rules. Maybe. Okay?
Okay, thanks for your comment. Thanks.
Okay, D is in fact constant in the model. Okay, so it's always constant when we look to it. When we bury D, it's constant for all firms. When we bury D, we are thinking about, well, if in this sector environmental damage is higher or lower. Okay.
How we set D equal to 1, all sectors are the same, you're going to get maximum factorability, and it might not be a bad benchmark to have results.
Normalize D.
Yeah, this is a more simple,
Okay, it's
formulation. But in this case, maybe it's simple, but maybe it's real.
Well, we'll think about it.
So in this case, you remove one parameter that is creating a lot of combinations. Maybe. Yes.
So I think it's super interesting, and my only comment is, how about you try to explore touching on the recent literature on firm heterogeneity within sectors. So I mean that's gonna reduce perhaps the part of the strategy. I mean, this is a duopoly, so now you would have to think about Cournot, for example. But there's tractability there as long as you assume heterogeneity comes in standard ways. Now you're going to have to choose, instead of the standard R&D questions that people study, you're going to choose green R&D. But I think a lot of the machinery you can probably still use. And it just seems like an interesting problem to study what's the role of competition in this type of investments, no?
Yes.
I mean, put differently, I don't know that many sectors that are going to be a duopoly, whereas, if you allow for a Cournot type of competition, perhaps, it's easier to bring it to the data. It's easier to motivate, get maybe quantitative results, and touch on the literature that's pushing this different frontier. It's not better or worse. It's just different, from what you do.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for your comment.
Okay, thank you very much for all your comments. Mimi, for your presentation. At the end is about presenting here, receiving some insights, and trying to think about your research according to all these comments. Thank you very much, Mimi.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Today I would like to present my progress of my thesis. I would like to present the progress of my thesis, 2 chapters, and the 3rd chapter is idea about the further further research under supervision, Professor Juan Antonio and Professor Alex. The first chapter is on the paradox of FDI in African region. Is North Africa different? This is the main or central focusing. This is the strategy of my chapters, introduction and motivation and etc. Introduction or motivation that I have chosen, we have chosen this this topic. FDI flows to Africa slumped 42 billion in 2017, a 20% decline from 2016, and decreased by 11% to 14 billion with reduced inflow in all countries except Egypt. This is the point also we can focus. And Southern Africa received higher in 2019. East Africa also the fastest growing region in Africa received 7.6 billion in FDI 2017. So when we compare between North Africa and other regions, there is a little changes. So we are focusing, or we are interested to compare between this region and other regions. Aim and research questions. The chapter aims to examine why North Africa has been relatively unsuccessful in attracting FDI compared to other regions. So that means North Africa is just a little bit changes we compared before. So the research question that we are focusing, what factors drive FDI to Africa? Are the factors equally relevant for FDI to North Africa? Why has North Africa attracted to so a little bit or so little FDI despite policy reform? Those questions, is North Africa different? This is the answer that to answer this question, we examine that. Later we will see another slides to see how we examine. So the most important related articles, why has Africa growing slowly? This article for Color and Gunning 1999, he tested African regions or African countries before, and he focusing, to conclude, focusing on domestic and external factors that affect, and the related and specific article on the determinants of FDI to developing countries. Is Africa different? By Professor Asidu, University of Kansas. She examined 71 developing countries, different countries from Latin America and Asia and Africa. She compared between that and the same question, and she employed OLS, data and methodology. Our data obtained from World Bank, and main variables that we are using here, we are using four variables, that the central variables that we are examining in our article: openness to trade, explaining here, return or investment. We use return. We use inverse of real GDP per capita to measure the return of capital. Infrastructure here is a very important variable to estimate. Here we use internet per 1,000 population, internet users in the host country. And the fourth one is natural resources. Natural resources, that means the sum of oil, gas, coal, mineral, and for rents. So this is the central variables. And we have control variables. We are using GDP growth, and inflation rate, and government consumption, and political stability. So we have two stages. Here, the table of the difference between North and other African regions. We are using here the mean or average of selected variable. We have chosen here just for 5 variables is very important. So this compare, just we see only natural resources is higher when we compare between other African. So FDI or openness infrastructure is return on investment is just different. So here the results. I use here the results. Sorry, I didn't talk about the methodology. Yeah, don't know where is it. The methodology I'm using generalized method of the moment. We are using this GMM to measure the data. So the methodology designed for estimations, different and system. There is different first step and second step, and system GMM first step and second step. So from Ariano Bond and Blondel-Bill. So later invented a new GMM from Rudman 2009. So we are using XT Bond from Rudman. So the results here, I divided the slides in three slides to explain the variables. So the first slide is for the main variables. The central variables here, FDI, GDP, this is the lagged variable that I'm using. A previous and current is positive for the 4 columns, and openness also positive sign with statistical in the 4 columns at 1%. Infrastructure also at 1%. A return on investment negative in 4 columns in 5% and 1%. Natural resources also positive and significant in 4 columns. The second slides appear here the control variables. Dummy here is minus at 1%. GDP growth positive at 1%. Inflation minus and 1%. So the third slides shows the interaction variables that here is changes between before and after. Changes before North and others. So interaction variable here, the infrastructure, the minus in the column 3 or 4 at 10% and 1%, and return minus the column 4 at 10%. Natural resources here is positive, the column 4 at 5%. The design of the results here, the first column we are focusing on the four variables only with lag. The second column I add the control variable plus to the central variables. The third I put the interaction variables plus to the central. The fourth, it is robust, the whole model I put it. So also the model is good for the Hansen test and the instruments. It's less than according to Rudman, and everything is good for the model. Conclusion here is some points. The factors that drive FDI, namely openness to trade, return on investment, natural resources, and infrastructure development, those variables that we are focusing have a different impact on FDI to North Africa. So that means translate to the question, the main question, that Africa is different. Is Africa is different? So good infrastructure is important for non-natural resources, passive investment. Policies that have been successful in other regions should be not blendy. So blendy replicate in North Africa. That means don't get any plan or strategy from other regions to put it in these regions. North Africa is perceived as overly risky, specifically after the Arabic Spring Revolution, and therefore some countries in the region will receive less FDI by virtue of its geographical location or other hidden reason. For example, here, Tunisia. It's not a natural resources country or Sudan. This is the example for that. This is the main idea or the specific deeply for the chapter. The second chapter is the determinants of FDI pre and after global financial crisis in African countries. Foreign direct investment. This is the definition of foreign direct investment. How to define this is an investment made by a firm or individual in one country into business interests located in another country. So motivation here, how we use or motivated this chapter, a huge reduction in global FDI inflows, 14% in 2008 and 37% in 2009. FDI in Africa, this is the global, and this is FDI, reached a peak of 72 billion in 2008 before falling for their successive years, and then rebounded back to 50 billion in 2012. After the financial global crisis, 2 or 3 years affected. Declining trend during 2008-2011 caused by several factors. Factors that means global financial crisis or the AMU revolutions that happened in North Africa, because North Africa is more developed than other countries, other regions. The hypothesis of our study is that we can assume that the determinants of FDI pre and after crisis will change dramatically in African countries. The aim and research questions. Research question here, what are the determinants of FDI in African countries? This question led us to go to the specific questions. Has the 2008 global financial crisis introduced FDI in African countries? So we have to answer this question later. Related studies, Alfaro, 2003, she made an good article for FDI and growth. Does the sector matter? She examined some in African countries, and she get positive with the infrastructure and openness, and other negative. It's a different impact. John Unwi, he asked close this question: why does FDI go where it goes? So he tested 53 countries in Africa before the global economic recession. So from 1996 to 2008, he tested some variables, and he used GMM. The main results is positive with the market size and GDP and openness and natural resources, and negative with financial development. Here, the heat map of the average of FDI and GDP in African countries from 1996 to 2016. Here I forget to change 2018. So it's having it like that. So this is the index here in the right side. The red color, it means the higher receiving FDI, and the dark green color is the lower. So here two heat maps between from before and after. So if we see here the index and we see here the countries, the first slide here, the first period of before global economic recession, we see here Equatorial Guinea is received more, and the second is Mozambique. So there is changed, and the yellow colors are also in the middle, from Mauritania or from other Angola, or so here the countries here the top countries 10 average of the countries that receiving or recipients of FDI pre and after. If we see here the the table, we see here Equatorial Guinea, it's the first, and then Mozambique. All of them is small countries, is not big countries. So the red color, that means the countries that is keep doing or keep receiving the FDI in the top of the 10 countries, like Seychelles, Congo Republic, Sao Tome, Principe, Mauritania, Cabo Verde. You see here and here. This is the concept of that. The methodology, the same. We are using the same methodology, GMM. For Rudman, we are using the same methodology and the same variables, 2 chapters. The data from World Bank also. Here the explaining also for the data and for the variables, how openness, infrastructure, and natural resources infrastructure, return on investment. Here the results. The results here, we see the main variables here, the initial results of the central indicators, FDI lag plus positive at 1%, openness positive at 1%, infrastructure positive at 1%, return on investment minus at 1%, natural resources positive at 1% also. The second slide, control variable. Dummy crisis here, we separated by dummy crisis 1997, 2007, 1996 until 2007, and 2008 until 2018. So I separated here with dummy variable, with the African dummy. Dummy crisis here positive in the column 3 and 4 at 1%. GDP growth positive in the 2 columns at 1%. Government consumption minus, and the second column at 1%. The third slide, interaction variable. Interaction variable here, we see openness, infrastructure, and natural resources, ROI and ROI. So openness here minus at 1%, infrastructure positive, the column 3 at 10%, return on investment positive in the column 3 and 4 at 1%, natural resources minus at 1%. The impact here is different before and after. The same variables before crisis and after crisis. We put here dummy variable, Africa dummy, but here interaction with openness for variables. Is it clear or? Yes, because in general, yeah, 2 periods, yeah. Yes, and 0. Yeah. And also the requirement of the Hansen test and the model is good here, because before 50%. Conclusion. The conclusion here it can be concluded that the lagged variable is a previous and current, explaining FDI how to FDI how to explain FDI with these variables. So have had an impact on a growth over 23 years. So the whole years. This indicates a previous level of FDI inflows contributes positively to explaining the current level of foreign investment inflows. So the lagged variables explaining, we are using this methodology instead or less or fixed effect or because it's a new model or improved model. Positive correlation between openness, infrastructure, and natural resources and FDI inflows at 1%, while the same results. It's repeated. Here the points. The study uncovers heterogeneity between African countries pre and after global financial crisis in different conditions, such as receiving FDI to countries like Equatorial Guinea and Mozambique. So uncovers before and after. FDI is likely to focus on region with relatively higher purchasing power rather than on expansion across the country, bigger countries like Seychelles and Sao Tome Principe. The last point here, that means FDI, according to my data, according to my period, is going to the country is higher purchasing, not big countries for the size or for the, like, for example, like Nigeria or Algeria or democracy. No, it's going to the higher purchasing. I mean, good market or something like that. Some is hidden here, but the points that we are doing here is clear. Third, the further research we are planning to do, impact of China's FDI outwards to Africa. We assume this research question: can China's FDI in Africa stimulate industrialization? So this is the main question. So we would like to test or to examine here the outflow of FDI from China to African countries, because this is the idea, because we are knowing that China, they don't have any historical colonize in Africa, and African people, they don't speak Chinese, and also China, the historical, they don't have, China does not have any historical before 20 or 30 years before. So when we get this result, we will compare that with European Union and USA, America. Because USA, because European, as a France, there is 14 countries investing there because they are speaking French. The historical colonize, and Spain, they invest there for 3 or 4 countries there, and there is 2 countries they are speaking Spanish language, and America also. We will compare that. We will conclude this. This subject. So the third chapter, it will be outflow, but the first and second, it's inflow. It's different. That's all. Thank you so much.
Okay. Presentation.
Sorry.
Así es.
No, so very interesting. On the second one, on the second chapter, I was thinking it would be interesting to make it a little bit different from the first one.
Yes.
To do something similar to what Manova did in her Journal of International Economics. I can send you the paper.
Yes.
So
yes,
basically,
kind of, yes.
So basically, I think what she does is to try to see how, because for you, it's just a crisis, no?
The second
It's the
chapter,
effect
yes, crisis.
of a time period or a
Yes.
two time periods,
Yes,
whatever.
two time periods.
So,
yeah.
but then I think it would be interesting because there's so much heterogeneity in Africa, no? And
Yes.
some countries might have been severely affected by the crisis, and maybe others not so much.
Others no, and others no, yeah.
And so if you have data on the interest rate on the interbank lending within the country,
okay.
that's a proxy for how strongly the crisis impacted the country, no?
Mm-hmm.
So then, I mean,
interest bank.
That's a better proxy for the crisis, actually. No?
Okay.
And then that's also useful for for thinking about what might have happened, as a consequence of the crisis, no? Because I mean, time periods.
Let me explain to you this point. Yes, you are right. In general, you are right. But African countries is not the whole countries that link it with the World Bank. I mean, the international bankers.
No. The interbank lending is the within country.
You mean in host countries?
Interest rate at which banks lend to each other.
Okay.
Okay. So and it's very. I mean, it's usually
it depends on the data.
Can I speak?
Sorry.
And it's usually linked to the interest rate that the central bank fixes. Not always. I mean, it may move around, but it is tightly linked to that usually. That's why monetary policy has an effect on the domestic economy.
Okay.
But when there are times of crisis, that may not be, the central bank rate might not be the best, as a good proxy. So, I mean, that's why that might be useful. It's a within country measure of the intensity of the crisis.
Yeah.
And that,
okay.
We can talk more about it
later.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Asier, comments? Carlos, please.
My question is, with this return on investment variable, I don't get the point why is the inverse on GDP, because at the end, if the results are negative for this variable, this means that countries with higher GDP, because it's the inverse, have a higher FDI, no? And also, there are lots of variables that somehow depend on GDP. Have you taken into account this? Maybe because there might be connection between the variables, since different variables are linked to GDP.
Okay. In general, FDI will go to the countries that pay higher return on capital. In general, FDI will go to the countries will pay to the higher return on capital. So we use it's difficult to find in developing countries how to measure the investment inside. So African countries is developing. So there is a heterogeneity there. So we expect that, and we use this variable that to return to the capital. We use the real GDP to the real GDP per capita. So we make inverse according to the references. So we are using, because it's before it's many articles that using. So we are using that. We expect that the results, it will be held to our estimation or our results, maybe explaining something. That's all. I think it's.
Okay, any other comments? In fact, I agree with Carlos that you have plenty of variables related to GDP in your specification. So 4 of them, 2 as a controls and 2 as main variables according to many different transformations. But in addition to that, what about including some variables trying to measure social political instability, because it has a lot of importance in terms of GDP. And also we're thinking about trying to, you said something related to the third paper, something related to institutions, different institutions connected with the previous colonial situation. So whether institutions provided by France were different to those provided by UK and those provided by many other countries. So whether previous institutions from an historical point of view may still have an influence over trends in terms of GDP.
So you mean to the third chapter, or you mean
no, in the first and in the second, for instance.
Yes, the variable.
Yes. So the point is how to include this institutional historical framework that may play a role in terms of the capacity to attract GDP at country level.
I think here I used this one. I think here the political stability is explaining that you said.
Okay.
The political stability. Yeah. Because there is two indicators here. There is political stability and political instability. But I'm using these because it's provided in World Bank. So I think is.
I didn't check that. Okay. You're right.
Any suggestion?
Okay. So thank you very much. We are a little bit late. So, Ali. In this case, but intention not exactly a PhD, but a researcher of the research center.
So senior.
Yeah, so senior. Congestion measures.
¿Qué decís, María?
Yeah.
Ostres, a trontollas, El último. Fantastic. Okay, so thanks for staying till the end for this last presentation. So I'm not going to present a paper. I'm just going to present a topic so that if you are not familiar with that, you can eventually grasp some intuitions, some ideas that may result interesting to you. So that's my point. Congestion, so the topic is congestion in transportation. So this is a subtopic of economics of transportation. And congestion has been, during the last 15 years or so, the most important topic in transportation. So the number of publications in congestion have increased dramatically in the last years. Of course, with the pandemic, congestion problems have substantially decreased, right? But, well, as we recover, this is gonna be, again, back to the center of the research in economics of transportation. So I've been conducting some research in congestion, both at the urban level and at the airport level. Okay. So the literature on congestion started first dealing with road congestion and urban congestion, and then it expanded to other modes of transportation and particularly to airport transportation. So I will deal with these two dimensions: urban congestion, so congestion produced by cars in cities, basically, and airport transportation, which is the congestion that is generated by airlines in airports. Okay. So this is a bit the idea. Okay. So congestion is an externality, but there are other externalities. Okay? So transportation generates externalities. Probably the most well-known externality produced by transportation is pollution. Okay. So, I mean, this is at the center of everything right now when we are talking about environmental damage. So pollution is a critical externality. In the case of urban transportation, the pollution that is generated is more at the local level. So this is local pollution, local pollutants, okay, which is, I mean, the sort of pollutants that we breathe when we are living in a city. Okay. While in the case of aviation, this is more like global pollution that contributes to global warming, etc. So there are these two dimensions of pollution: local pollution and global pollution. Okay. Well, this is one externality. The second one is congestion, which is the one I'm going to mostly refer to in my presentation. When we talk about congestion, we basically are referred to time loss. Okay? So this is the excess travel time that we experience with respect to a free flow situation. So this is the idea you need to keep in mind. Okay? So, I mean, in the case of aviation, there are other things like you may lose connections, lose your luggage, etc. Okay. So, but basically, we refer to a loss of time and the economical impact that this loss of time, I mean, carries with it. Okay. And then there are other externalities like accidents. Okay, this is also in the case of urban transportation, and I didn't mention it here, but there's also noise, which is very important. Okay? So noise is another externality, especially in aviation, is very important. Okay. Well, so there are like many things going on here. Okay. But probably the most important ones are pollution, and actually pollution and noise are linked to each other because more emissions typically also are related to technologies that generate more noise. So, well, so basically the most important ones probably are pollution and congestion. Okay. Okay, so just to motivate a bit more the pollution externality, I mean, this is just to say that it's a huge problem. Okay, and this is why we are seeing now a lot of measures that try to abate pollution. Okay, so this is just an information from some papers from environmental sciences that say that more than 3 million people die every year because of pollution-related diseases. Okay, so I mean, this is just to give an idea of the dimension of the problem. So this is a huge problem. Okay, and the World Health Organization warns that 92% of population lives in places with harmful air quality. And transportation is the main contribution, the main contributor to pollution. I mean, in some areas like China, there are also some factories in cities that generate local pollution, etc. But in most of the countries, especially in Europe and America, pollution is basically related to transportation. Okay? So transportation, again, is the main contributor to pollution. Okay, what about congestion? Congestion, this is less perceived by the population. Okay, so pollution is something that everybody is aware about, right? Congestion, not so much. I mean, people are not so aware about the damages of congestion, but economists are. So, but here we have like a gap between the researchers and the general population. Okay. That reports that the loss in terms of the economical loss in terms of, again, loss of time caused by congestion is around 200 billion per year in UK, France, Germany, and the US. And it is, and this is another thing. This is increasing non-stop. I mean, both now, except with the outbreak caused by the pandemic, both pollution and congestion are increasing over time during the last 20 years. Okay, in spite of every measures that have been adopted. Okay. And in the case of Spain, we have one study by TomTom that shows that in Barcelona, I mean, the damage of congestion can be, estimated to 175.5 million euros per year, which is tantamount to 119 excess hours, so overtime hours behind the wheel per year, which is tantamount to 14 working days. Okay, so that's a lot, right? And in Madrid, we have some similar figures. Okay, so again, population is not so much aware about congestion. Okay, but congestion is a big problem as well, and there is a correlation between the two, right? So if you think about urban congestion, you have traffic jams. Then you have pollution, you have congestion. Okay? Because if you have traffic jams, I mean, cars are like like starting, stopping with low gears, and this generates more pollution. So congestion and pollution go hand by hand. Okay. So these are the externalities, right? So what can we do about that? The first idea that comes to the general public is, let's improve the infrastructures. Okay, let's improve the supply, right? Because here we have a problem in the sense that demand is larger than supply. You have an excess of demand, right? Especially in peak hours. You have more users than capacity. So you have an excess demand. So you can either look at the demand or look at the supply, right? So the first reaction that people typically have is, okay, let's increase the supply. Let's build more infrastructure, right? And there is this is something that may work in developing countries, but in developed countries, this is a huge mistake. And there is a very famous paper in the American Economic Review by Duranton and Turner, in which they show that increasing the supply, it's really ineffective, because as you increase the supply, the demand increases proportionally, or more or less proportionally. Okay, so when you have mature infrastructures, increasing the supply, so building more lanes, and in the case of Los Angeles, this is, they are increasing lanes in the last 20 years. So you have more lanes being built, and then traffic congestion and traffic jams are like seem to never disappear or even get worse and worse. And this is very expensive, and we are economists, right? So spending a lot of money. So you have to think about the opportunity cost of these investments. So building very, very expensive infrastructures that do not solve the problem but make it worse, it's really a very bad policy, right? It's a very, very bad policy. So you shouldn't do that. Okay. So the other thing that that you can do is look at the demand. So if looking at the supply is not working and it's extremely expensive, you eventually should look at the demand. In the case of airports, building larger airports can be effective, but it's still very expensive. Okay? So in the case of airports, it's a bit different, because this can be effective for some period in the sense of mitigating congestion. Okay, but still it's very expensive. It's extremely expensive. And now we're having a debate about the expansion of the airport of Barcelona. Okay, so what can we do in terms of demand? Okay, we should try to, if we cannot increase supply, we should try to decrease demand. Okay, so basically you have two families of policies here. You have price-based policies. Okay, that mean so you try to somehow increase prices to decrease demand. So here you have fuel prices, for instance, and taxes, fuel taxes, for instance. Okay, but the most effective policy that you may implement here are congestion tolls. So tolls. So you need to pay a toll to get into a city, or you need to, more in general, in road congestion, you pay a toll to use a certain infrastructure. Okay, so this is something you can do to use price-based measures that basically imply to pay a price to use the infrastructure. Okay, this is something you can do. And the other thing you can do is to apply quantity-based measures. Okay? Quantity-based measures imply to reduce the demand without using a price. Okay? So in the case of urban congestion, the two major quantity-based measures that are being applied are the restrictions in terms of license number. So there are some countries, especially in South America, where there are days during the week where only even numbers, so license plate even numbers, cars with a license plate even number can get into the city or exit the cities during certain days of the week. So, and there is this restriction with odd and even license plate numbers. So this is one thing you can do. The most popular measure that is being applied really widely in Europe are low emission zones. Okay? Low emission zones this so-called a vintage specific restriction because it depends on the age of the car. Okay, because older cars are more pollutant than newer cars. Okay, so well, this is another quantity-based measure. So you decrease the amount of cars by banning older cars to get into the city. Okay, so this is another thing you can do. Okay, so basically you have these two families of policy measures. Okay, and there are others. Okay, there are others like speed limits, bumps, parking restrictions, pedestrianization, etc. Okay, and parking is a very. I'm not going to talk about parking, but it's a very effective measure as well. Okay. So, and this is related to the supply measures that I was mentioning before. So everything's about incentives, okay? So if you put more parking lots, you're gonna have more cars, okay? So in the old days, cities were worried about including more parking facilities, and now what we are observing is the opposite. So reducing park facilities to create disincentives to the use of personal transportation, okay? But I'm going to quickly focus on this difference between price-based policies and quantity-based policies. Okay. So this is the textbook analysis about congestion. Okay. So in the y-axis, you have time. Then the time you need to get into a city. For instance, if you now think about urban congestion. Okay. Let's think about getting into a city. Okay. So T would be the time you need, the average time you need to get into a city. Or get out of the city. It doesn't matter. Okay, and Q is traffic in the x-axis. Okay, so when there is no congestion, that means when traffic is lower than Q tilde here in this diagram, you basically you need some time to get into the city, and that's it. Okay, but from a certain point, from a certain threshold, this Q tilde, if you look at the T function, which is your individual time, or if you want, in terms of public economics, this would be the average cost for a commuter. Okay, this would be the average cost that you experience. And when there is congestion, your cost increases exponentially, and this is very important. Congestion is an exponential behavior. Okay, so you see that when there is congestion, your travel time increases exponentially. Okay, I'm talking about the second function, the one on the right. T in terms of traffic. Okay. Understanding that congestion is an exponential phenomenon is very interesting because this helps to understand after how measures work. Because the bad thing about an exponential function like this one is that congestion appears very fast. So you are in a free flow situation, and suddenly you don't know. It's like magical. You don't know why. In a matter of 10 minutes, you are stuck. And you say, well, I mean, 10 minutes ago, it was like very free flow, and now I'm stuck. So because it appears very fast. And so you don't have time to react, right? But the good news is that if you reduce a bit the traffic, then congestion disappears. So it appears very fast, but it can also disappear very fast. Okay, and in some places where we have congestion tolls being implemented, when for traffic reductions is about 15%, you pass from being stuck to a free flow situation. So policies are very effective. Policies are very, very effective, right? So this is the good news. Okay, so this would be the average cost, T, the T function here. Okay. And then if you compute the social, this is the same kind of analysis that you have in public economics when you explain externalities. Okay, so the second function is computed as the marginal social cost. So you compute the total cost, which is QT, okay, which is the total time produced by commuters, okay, and then you make the derivative, so you have the marginal social cost, okay. So the second function is the marginal social cost, and in the marginal social cost there is the time, the T, that you produce individually as a commuter, but then there is another term, and the second term is the externality. Okay? The second term is the excess time you impose on the others because you are using the infrastructure. Okay, so this is the externality. Okay, so this is this figure. Okay, so in the private equilibrium, which is Q star, this is what you have. So you have the average cost, which is like the private supply. This is why we have SP here, is relabeled the function SP. The average cost is the private supply. And then SS is the social supply, which is the marginal social cost. Okay. Okay. So if you introduce a demand function in the analysis, which basically depends on the value of time of commuters, okay, on the valuations of commuters to commute. So this is the willingness to pay of commuters. Okay. Then you can calculate the private equilibrium, which is Q star T star. Okay. And then you can compute the social optimum in the intersection between the demand and the marginal social cost, the social supply, okay? And you can compare both of them. And of course, you have an excess traffic, okay? So since individual commuters don't take into account the externality they generate on the others, there's too much traffic, right? That generates congestion, okay? So here, there are two things you can do. If you for instance, a congestion toll, what you do if you have an optimal congestion toll, which is a Pigouvian tax, right? You have an optimal congestion toll, what you obtain is that you can shift the private supply in a way that it meets the social supply, okay? So if you do that, then you eliminate the excess traffic. If you do it optimally, of course, you eliminate the excess traffic and you recover the social optimum. So you achieve an efficient result. This is what you can obtain with an optimal congestion toll. Again, that is computed as a Pigouvian tax. It's an optimal Pigouvian tax. Okay. And the other thing you can do is to apply a demand restriction policy. So this is the other kind of policies. This is the quantity-based policies. Okay. You, for instance, remember the license plates or the low emission zones. Okay. That you basically shift the demand down. This is what you do, right? And if you do it correctly, optimally, you can also recover the social optimum, okay? So both measures can be equally effective if they are designed optimally. So this is the good news in terms of comparing both kind of policies. But as you can see here, I didn't mention it in the previous slide, the excess traffic, of course, generates a deadweight loss, which is this gray area, because in this gray area, the social cost is larger than the valuation of the commuters in this excess traffic region. Okay, okay. So this is a loss, a welfare loss. Okay, right. And then what you have in yellow is just the total welfare in the social optimum. Okay. But the problem of demand-oriented policies or quantity restrictions is that you can eliminate this deadweight loss, as we have with congestion tolls, but you generate another loss here, okay, which is this new gray area here. You generate another loss because you don't take into. I mean, the point here is that these kind of measures are can be very inefficient, because they don't discriminate in terms of the valuations of the commuters. For instance, you may be a commuter that you really need to get into the city. You have a high valuation of your trip, but you cannot go there because you have in the case of a low emission zone, you have an old car, or in case a license plate restriction, you have a car that has an even license plate number, and this day of the week you can get into the city. So you may value a lot the product, so in this case, getting into the city, and you cannot do it, right? So this is very inefficient. And efficiency is an argument, again, that is very common for economists, but it's strange for non-economists. Okay? So when you try to explain these kind of things to non-economists, I mean, this concept of efficiency is hard to, it's not so easy to understand. Okay? But for us, it's very crystal clear, right? So if you compare both policies in terms of efficiency, it's pretty clear. I mean, congestion tolls are much better because people who value the product are the ones who pay the congestion toll and get into the city. So if you have a high valuation of the product, you will pay the toll and you will be happy because you will get into the city, you will arrive on time, you won't be stuck in a traffic jam, and you know, and congestion tolls are very low, are €1, €2, so it's relatively low. And I mean, even it can be even in terms of private benefits, it can be even beneficial because you save a lot in gasoline. Okay, so you make savings in gasoline, you make savings in time, you get on time to your place, so you're very happy, right? So this is very good for you in terms of efficiency. So people who value the product are the ones who actually buy the product. So this is good news. This is very efficient. Instead, in the case of quantity restrictions, this is not like that. So this is like, you know, this is non-discriminatory. Low emission zones or restrictions by the number of plate apply to people, and you don't take into account their valuations. So this is the reason why these measures are very inefficient in general. Okay. In terms of effectiveness, as I said before, both of them can be equally effective if they are designed optimally. They can be effective. This is an issue, a short run versus long run, because if you think, for instance, about low emission zones, in the short run they can be very effective, but as the fleet is renewed, the new cars, you know, comply with the restrictions, and they again can enter into the city. So low emission zones can solve in the short term both externalities, but in the long term they solve the environmental externality, the pollution externality, but they don't solve the congestion externality. So this is something that you have to take into account if you move from the short run to the medium long run. Okay. What happens about regressivity? Because the idea again of the general population is that tolls are regressive. You know, you make people pay. This is a new tax. We have different incomes. So why the poor people should pay the same that the rich people, right? This is very, I mean, this is unfair. This is regressive, right? So the answer is that that's not correct. Okay. So the studies we have about congestion tolls show, I mean, some of them show that these measures are not regressive, because precisely what I told you before, because you make savings in terms of gasoline. So, well, if you pay €1, €2 to get into a city, but you make savings on the other hand, well, it's not very clear that you will end up worse individually. And there's another issue, that's the people who own cars typically are already high income population as compared to people that are more poorer than don't own a car. Okay, so it's not very clear that this is regressive. There is not a strong evidence that this is regressive. Okay. Instead, low emission zones are extremely regressive, because the people who own the older cars are clearly the poorer people within the population of car owners. Right? Okay, so the people who know new hybrid electric cars, you know, these are high income population, so they are not affected by low emission zones. Okay, and so if measures, if tolls are better than quantity restrictions, low emission zones, why don't we see more tolls? Because there are only 5 tolls in the world, you know, or 5, 6. Okay, and there are a lot of low emission zones in Europe. Now there is a new law in Spain that obliges in 2030, I think, for all urban areas with more than 50,000 inhabitants to implement a low emission zone. So low emission zones are getting like the standard, especially in Europe, and there are no tolls. Why? Why is like that? This is very frustrating, right? So we have a problem in terms of acceptability. Is that people don't like tolls, okay? Because this is like paying for something that it used to be free and I have to pay for it. So this is perceived as a new tax. This is perceived as something like very, very negative, right? So it's very hard to implement congestion tolls. So we should explain all these things that I'm talking to you, that I'm explaining to you, to the policymakers, but I mean, they don't want to do that. It's very unpopular, and it's funny because low emission zones are very popular, especially and they are promoted by left-wing governments, and they are poor people, right? So they are very regressive, but they are popular. And instead, tolls are very unpopular and are much less regressive, more effective, and especially more efficient than low emission zones, okay? Than quantity-based restrictions in general. So there is a big problem in terms of social acceptability of tolls in general. Okay, I may be exceeding time. You tell me. You tell me when I have to stop. Huh?
No. We have started later on, so.
Okay. Okay. So there's a problem in terms of acceptability. So if we compare urban congestion with airport congestion, which is the difference? The difference is that in commuters in urban congestion, so users are atomistic. That means that they don't. They don't take into account the congestion they impose. They are very small, so they don't have market power. They just impose congestion on the others. Okay, so they don't internalize congestion. And this is the difference precisely with airport congestion. In airport congestion, you have big operators. So this is like comparing a perfect competition with an oligopoly. Okay, here you have market power, so you have few carriers, few airlines operating in an airport. Okay, and they don't want to harm themselves, right? So in airports, we have this phenomenon of internalization. So in the literature of congestion, there is probably the most important area is about internalization. Is to which extent operators internalize congestion. Okay? And in airports, you have this phenomenon. Is that this is an typically these are oligopolies. So you have few operators in an airport, and they internalize the congestion they impose on themselves, but not the congestion they impose on the others. Okay, so this is the kind of issue you should have to take into account in this case. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to make a short comment on airports, and I will finish. Okay, since I basically have the theoretical analysis is the same as the one I showed you before, okay? But there are some specificities about airports. Okay, okay. Well, this is just to show that, and this graph is not very good. If you take an even longer period, you clearly observe the huge increase in demand over the last decades. Okay, so demand is increasing dramatically. Again, now we have the outbreak with the coronavirus, but this is gonna, recover later on. Okay. So as I told you before, supply measures are very expensive. In airports, they can be effective during some time. Okay, but there are other limitations. Besides the fact that they are very expensive, is that sometimes it's impossible because you have like physical constraints. Okay, sometimes you have regulations. This is a noise regulation. There are some places in the US where you have noise regulations. So you know the planes, for instance, in Long Beach, the planes that arrive to the airport of Long Beach, they have to go up. And once they pass the urban area, they go down. So because there is a regulation around the urban area of Long Beach. So this is complicated. So expanding an airport in this situation, this is very complicated, right? Then they take a really long period from design to implementation. It takes a really long time. And what I told you at the beginning, it's extremely expensive. And as economists, you always have to, when you talk about public policies, you always have to think about the opportunity cost of the investments that you approve, right? Okay. So what are the measures in the case of airports? The quantity-based measures I was referring before in the case of urban congestion about low emission zones. Now, in the case of airports, are slot constraints. Slot constraints, basically limit the number of operations. Okay. So this is the quantity-based measure that you observe in airports. And the price-based measures are congestion pricing, again, which is imposing congestion tolls to airlines, but this is not implemented. So this is a theoretical thing because this has never been implemented. Okay. Okay. So what are these measures? How can these measures affect the operators? How can these measures affect the airlines? Okay, so airlines, here you have to understand that congestion depends on frequency. Okay, so basically the congestion is almost the same. The congestion imposed by a small aircraft is almost the same that the congestion imposed by a big aircraft. Okay, in terms of parking and occupying the space in the terminal. Okay, so I mean, if you think about flight frequency, this is the key. You should try to, when you apply either price or quantity-based measures, you should try to reduce flight frequency. Okay, if you reduce flight frequency, you reduce congestion and you reduce emissions as well, and you reduce pollution as well. Okay, and this is linked to aircraft size. Okay, because if you want to maintain the same, the same level of traffic, what you should try is to create incentives to increase aircraft size and decrease flight frequency. Okay, that's a bit the idea. Another alternative would be to try to increase load factor. Load factor is the degree of occupancy of the aircraft. Okay, but this occupancy is very, very high already. So, this is not really something you can do. With low-cost carriers, this is load factor is above 90%. So, So again, the point here should be to try to decrease flight frequency and increase aircraft size. Okay. And then there's another dimension with airlines, which is something I have done some research on that. I have conducted some research on that as well, which is network structure, right? Is that now most major carriers are organize their networks around hubs. You know that. Everybody knows that, right? So when you have networks organized around hubs, then if you have a congestion problem in a hub, then you have this spreads out over the network, right? So hubs are very key players in this kind of structure, because you have congestion in a hub, then you have a congestion in the whole network. So this makes networks very sensitive to congestion problems. Okay, so this is another particularity that you need to take into account when you think about congestion in airports. Okay, and then coming back to this is my last slide. Okay, because I have done some other research on that as well. So what I'm giving you here is like a collage of my research in different areas related to congestion. Okay, and this is another thing. Since I told you, I talked to you before about congestion internalization, if you remember, okay? I said, if you have an oligopoly structure, you internalize the congestion you impose on yourself, but not the congestion you impose on the others. Okay? So an interesting phenomenon here, because alliances and mergers are very important in the airline industry, right? A very interesting phenomenon here is that when an alliance or a merger is formed, right? Then the partners in the alliance or in the merger, they start to take into account the congestion they impose on their partners. So a good positive effect of alliances and mergers is that partners typically start taking into account the congestion they impose on their partners. So this generates an extra internalization of congestion. Okay, so this is another particularity of the airline industry that you don't have in urban transportation. Okay, well, and that's basically my presentation. This last part was more focused on airport congestion. I'm about to finish, Jose Maria. Well, as I said, the first point again is, supply measures, increasing infrastructure. It's very hard. This is very hard and it's extremely expensive. Okay, so the point here is when we have congestion, the analysis you have to do is that you have too much frequency and too small aircraft. So you should try to generate incentives for airlines to operate larger aircraft and reduce frequency. That's what you should try to do, either with congestion tolls, which have never been applied in the air transportation industry, or a slot constraint. Okay. So and there is a system based on aircraft weight when designing landing fees that is very bad, right? Okay, because this system based on aircraft weight is like creating disincentives to use larger aircraft, and this is the opposite you should do. Right? You should create incentives to use larger aircraft if you have congestion problems, and there are many other things, but this is just a small picture. I hope you like it.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. So I have some time for questions, comments. Sebastiano, please.
About the final discussion, I was wondering, when you talk about the need to increase the aircraft capacity, assuming the companies can achieve it.
Assuming the companies can achieve increased capacity, wouldn't it just shift the problem then to going back to a high load factor? Because obviously the load factor wouldn't stay the same when you get bigger flights and less frequency. There would be problems to guarantee the load factor that you were talking about. It was around 90% for the low-cost carriers, but maybe with the lowest frequency and bigger aircraft, the problem would just shift there. I'm wondering.
Of course, I mean, the service when you reduce frequency and you increase aircraft size, the service you provide is worse. So this is something that I didn't mention, but in terms of demand, I mean, your service is worse because passengers like frequency. You want, I mean, there is a concept in transportation economics that is called well, it's like the schedule disutility, if you want, right? Or schedule delay. We normally call it schedule delay, which means the gap between your preferred departure time and your actual departure time. So if you have a poorer frequency, then this disutility increases, of course. So you have, there's a trade-off here. Yeah, the service quality is lower if you have less frequency. That's for sure. This is a price you have to pay if you want to mitigate congestion. Yeah.
Carlos, please.
Yes, I have like an appreciation and something that, well, the first thing is that when you talk about the low emission zones and talking about their highly regressive effect, I think there was kind of an assumption that people is mainly using their private transportation. And I think if these low emission zones are accompanied by sufficient and affordable public transport alternatives, the regressivity might be lower, or I don't know. This is the first appreciation. Okay. And then the other comment I would like to do is about looking to these problems from a wider perspective, because when implementing this kind of price or quantity-based measures, it's like you are taking current transportation patterns as given. But I mean, people move for one reason, no? Mainly, it might be working, no, to work, commuting, or for leisure, no? And then I think that from the larger perspective, in order to tackle these congestion problems, maybe it's not only a matter of tackling current transportation patterns, but understanding why people work where they work, why people live where they live, no? And with this is something related to territorial planification. And also my specific question with this is, do you think that the impact of the pandemic in the patterns of telework, that some patterns have been shown to be at least slightly changing, might have an effect on reducing congestion? And what do you think about this wider perspective on congestion problems?
Yeah. Okay. Good questions. On the first one, this is an extra argument in favor of congestion tolls, actually, because congestion tolls, to be implemented, since they measures reinforcing public transportation always in all the cases where you have congestion tolls, you have I mean the money you collect from the congestion tolls is fully given to public transportation. Okay, so you always improve public transportation. Instead, with low emission zones, you don't do it. So well, so this is an extra argument in favor of congestion tolls, because you will always improve public transportation when you implement congestion tolls. Okay, and yes, of course, high public transportation is crucial, and you need to have this alternative. So this is crucial. Yeah. And on the second comment, there are measures that I didn't mention, which is everything about car sharing, motor sharing, bike sharing, autonomous vehicles, etc. So there's a lot of things here, more on the medium run, if you want. Okay. And yeah, I mean, in the medium run is going to be residual probably. Okay, because having a car that you are basically not using during 98% of the time is very inefficient, right? So, well, in terms of urban, I don't know. I mean, I don't know to what extent people are going to move outside the cities to have environmental like amenities and not being stuck in the city. I don't know. This I don't know. But in terms of mobility, it's true that there are some patterns of mobility that are changing. And the point is not so much the electrical car, but the autonomous car. So having autonomous car will facilitate much more car sharing. And therefore, if people own less cars, you're going to have less congestion problems and less problems of emissions. So I guess vehicles is going to be a huge. It's going to carry with it a big change. Yeah, in the medium run, not the long run. Huh? I mean, the technology is quite developed. So
you have an interesting debate about between congestion tolls and low emission zones, and also about whether which one of them is preferred, which one of them is more efficient. But I think that perhaps the debate is because we are not really aware if we are targeting congestion or we are targeting pollution.
Yeah, that's another very good comment. Is that normal low emission zones are perceived to a better tool to mitigate pollution, and congestion tolls are typically perceived as a more focused measure to congestion. But both measures end up having effects on both externalities. Yeah.
And just to finish, as we are very late, but as you made some comments about this plan for expansion in the Barcelona airport, what do you think about that? Because typically we have it's a debate because typically people, institutions, governments favor all this kind of public investment, but now we are in a situation in which most of public institutions in Catalonia are against this investment. So what's the point about that? Yesterday we had a very large event in Esag supporting this plant investment by AENA, but at least this is a very controversial issue right now.
Okay, my point first is looking at the opportunity cost. You have to decide whether you want to use this money to increase an airport that it's gonna work for some period, so it's gonna mitigate the problem of congestion during some period. Okay, this is one first reaction about that. But from a more like local perspective, okay, well, I don't see any argument to be against the enlargement of the airport. I mean, if you are a local authority and AENA gives you the money to do it, and you have been claiming for ages to have this money to enlarge the airport, and now you have the money finally to enlarge the airport, because we don't remember, but in the last years, there have always been a lot of problems with congestion during the summertime with Ryanair and especially with Vueling. We had very serious congestion problems in the Barcelona airport before the Spanair crisis. But even after the Spanair crisis, the traffic recovered very fast. So we had also congestion problems before. So from a local perspective, well, you have these environmental problems, and but when you build an infrastructure, you have always an environmental trade-off. Otherwise, you would never build a road or a train. I mean, there are always some environmental trade-offs, and there is some compensation which is already planned for this potential environmental damage. And then I'm not an environmental expert, but to the extent that I know this region where that will be affected by the expansion of the airport, this is an artificial region that doesn't really have a very huge environmental value. But well, I'm not sure if I'm making a correct analysis about that. Okay, so first reaction, you want to spend the money in airports or in other thing. Second reaction, if you want to spend the money in transportation, I mean, from the local authorities, it's a very good opportunity. It's a lot of money. You know?
Yeah, well, in fact, the first criticism was these environmental issues.
I don't really see an environmental problem here, but okay.
And the second point that has been discussed is about territorial disequilibrium in terms of what to increase capacity of this airport if you have airports like here in Reus or in Girona, which are clearly below their potential capacity.
Yeah, because because you, of course, it's not the same, right? And if you want to have an international hub, you need to have a certain dimension. Otherwise, you won't do it. I mean, there are a lot of in his presentation he talked about the impact of air transportation, right? In the GDP. I mean, one of the key to have a spread out. I mean, in terms of economic impact of an airport is to have interconnections, right? So if it's of course not the same. I mean, the big market is Barcelona, point number one, and point number two, if you need to have interconnections, you need to have a sufficiently high size. So okay. It's not comparable. It's not the same like flying to Reus than flying to Barcelona.
Yeah, no. Over the table right now in this debate that we don't know how it's gonna be ended in the future. Okay, so thank you. Yeah. And thank you here.
Sorry for the time.
For presenting, for your questions. This is the aim of these doctorials, to present your ideas, to present your working papers in order to receive some feedback that could help you to improve them. Thank you very much, and see you again. The next edition is scheduled in December. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.